If you want to learn to woodwork, you start by learning how to cut a straight line.
Right, exactly. Keep it simple.
Yeah, and if you want to learn to code, you write a program that just says, hello, world.
A classic.
It's linear, it obeys the laws of classical physics and, well, basic logic. But imagine for a second that the next skill humanity is trying to learn doesn't obey those laws at all.
Not even a little bit.
No. Picture reality itself not as this static environment we just live in, but as a giant cosmic 3D printer.
Oh, I like that analogy.
Right. And we are staring at the control panel for this thing, basically just blindly mashing the buttons to see what happens.
Just trying to see what breaks.
Exactly. And we are just now realizing that the machine is actively responding to our button mashing by rewriting the actual shape of the room we're standing in.
Which is terrifying. I mean, we are crossing a threshold here.
We really are.
The era of passively observing the universe is ending. And we're entering an era where we might actually be steering it and doing so without a map.
Which brings us to our mission today. We have two wildly different but deeply connected sources on the table for this deep dive to figure out what that map might look like for you, the listener, sitting right here in the room with us.
It's a really fascinating pairing of texts, too.
It is. First, we're going to explore the concept of quantum supremacy. And we're doing this through the lens of a highly philosophical, incredibly dense dialogue between a user and an AI.
Yeah, dense is the right word. It goes deep into the mechanics of observation, the weirdness of causality.
The philosophical weight of computing reality itself.
Exactly. It sets up the whole theoretical framework.
And then, once we have a firm grip on that science, we are going to pivot hard.
Yes, we are.
We'll look at what happens when those exact scientific concepts are weaponized, when they're pushed to their absolute terrifying extremes in a sci-fi short story called Parallels by Dust.
It's a very deliberate progression. You take the dry math, you scale it up to a macroscopic level, and you inject human hubris.
Always a dangerous combination.
Always. It forces us to confront the existential consequences of achieving quantum supremacy, but, without having the wisdom to handle it.
Right. So let's start with the science. Because before we can talk about steering the universe, we have to talk about how the universe decides what is actually real.
Which is trickier than it sounds.
Way trickier. Because our intuition tells us time is an arrow. I drop a glass, it shatters.
Cause and effect.
Right. The shattering is the effect, dropping it is the cause. But there's this famous experiment in quantum mechanics called the delayed choice quantum eraser. And it seems to take that arrow, snap it in half, and just throw it right out the window.
Yeah, the quantum eraser is notorious. It makes people think physicists have secretly invented a time machine.
Right, which they haven't, I assume.
They haven't. I mean, what's fascinating here is that the confusion usually stems from the word observation.
How so?
Well, in standard parlance, observation implies a conscious observer, like a person looking with their eyes.
Right, a scientist in a lab coat staring at a screen.
Exactly. But in quantum physics, observation has absolutely nothing to do with consciousness.
Oh, really?
It is entirely about information leakage.
Okay, let's unpack this. Information leakage.
Yeah, the technical term we use is decoherence.
Okay. So if we think about a quantum system, say an electron in superposition.
Existing in a cloud of probabilities.
Right. It stays in that state of multiple possibilities as long as it is perfectly isolated, right?
Precisely. But perfect isolation is basically impossible in the real universe.
Because the universe is just incredibly noisy.
Very noisy. Observation, or decoherence, happens the moment information about that quantum system interacts with the broader environment.
Okay, so the environment is the observer.
Yes. And there are three primary ways to conceptualize this. The first is simply the registration of information.
Give me an example.
Imagine a single photon traveling through a total vacuum.
Okay.
If it bumps into a solitary random gas molecule, and that molecule's trajectory is altered even infinitesimally by the collision.
Like a tiny cosmic fender bender.
Exactly. An imprint of the photon's state has been left in the universe. Information has leaked.
So the superposition collapses right then and there.
Yes. No human ever needs to look at that gas molecule.
The universe just keeps its own ledgers.
That's a great way to put it. The second way to view it is the physical mechanism of decoherence itself.
Okay, what does that look like?
Think of a quantum object in superposition as a tuning fork, one that's vibrating with a very delicate, complex chord of multiple frequencies all at once.
Okay, I'm picturing it.
Decoherence is the equivalent of throwing a heavy wool blanket over that tuning fork.
Oh, wow. So the vibration doesn't just start.
Right, the energy is absorbed.
It's dispersed into the chaotic macroscopic environment of the blanket.
Exactly. The delicate quantum state is drowned out by classical noise.
Got it. And the third concept.
Irreversibility. When a quantum particle is flying through empty space, its state is governed by a wave equation that is theoretically time reversible.
Meaning the math works backward and forward.
Exactly. But the moment that particle hits a photographic plate or interacts with a macroscopic detector, it triggers a cascade of chemical or electronic reactions.
And you cannot unbake that cake.
You really can't.
Yeah.
The information becomes a permanent fixture of macroscopic history.
Okay. So an observation is basically just the universe committing to a specific storyline because the information escapes the quantum realm. It got etched into the classical world.
Yes.
But the quantum eraser experiment, this is where I need to challenge the standard explanation, or at least try to wrap my head around it.
Go for it.
If irreversibility is true, how does the eraser seem to undo it? Because the source text details the setup. We use a special crystal to create two entangled photons.
Yes, they share a single quantum state.
Right, so let's call them the signal photon and the idler photon.
Okay, so we send the signal photon toward a screen with two slits, like the classic double slit experiment.
Right, and we send the idler photon into this complex maze of beam splitters and detectors.
Exactly, and because they are entangled, whatever we measure about the idler tells us exactly what the signal photon did.
Okay, so if we set up the detectors to definitively record which slit the signal photon went through, we get the classic result.
The information leaks.
Right. The signal photon hits the screen and acts like a normal solid particle. Two distinct lines appear on the screen, no wave pattern.
Right.
But the delayed choice aspect is what literally breaks my brain here.
It's the tricky part, yeah.
Because we let the signal photon hit the screen first. The mark is made, the history is written.
The cake is baked.
Exactly. Then, microseconds later, we randomly activate a scrambler in the idler's path that permanently deletes the information about which slit it went through.
The witch path information is completely erased from the universe before it could be registered by the final detectors.
And when we look at the data afterward, the signal photons whose idler twins were scrambled suddenly form an interference pattern.
They act like waves.
Even though they already hit the screen as particles, I mean, it looks like the decision we made in the present went back in time and changed how the photon behaved in the past.
It looks that way, yes. But what's fascinating here is that the reality is much stranger and honestly much more subtle.
So the past isn't rewritten.
No, the past is not rewritten. The mark on the screen where the signal photon hit does not physically move.
Then where does the illusion of retrocausality come from?
It comes from a failure to understand entanglement. We tend to assume the signal photon and the idler photon are two separate objects communicating with each other over a distance.
Like they're texting each other.
Right. But they aren't. They are a single, unified quantum system spread across space.
Oh, okay. So when the signal photon hits the screen, it hasn't actually undergone total decoherence yet.
Exactly. Because its other half, the idler, is still flying through the maze.
The cake isn't fully baked until the whole system resolves.
That is a crucial insight. The entanglement preserves the link. If you just look at the screen initially, it just looks like a chaotic mess of particle impacts.
Just a scattershot of dots.
Right, there's no visible wave pattern. But when you look at the data from the idler photon detectors and you filter the screen impacts, isolating only the signal photons whose idlers were erased.
Suddenly, within that chaotic mess, a perfectly hidden wave pattern emerges.
Yes, you extract the pattern from the noise by correlating the data.
It's like staring at a wall covered in millions of random dots, and someone hands you a transparency sheet with a specific filter on it.
Oh, I like that.
You lay it over the wall, and suddenly the dots spell out a word. The dots on the wall didn't move.
The past didn't change.
You just changed the contextual information you used to view it.
That is an excellent analogy. Erasing the witch path information removes the conceptual boundaries that classical physics tries to impose on the particles.
It reveals their shared wave nature.
Exactly. It proves that in the quantum realm, the physical state of reality, whether something behaves as a solid particle or a wave of probability, depends entirely on where and how information is stored in the present moment.
That's wild, because if information dictates reality, then controlling that information is the ultimate power.
It really is.
Which is the perfect bridge to quantum supremacy. Because we aren't just performing esoteric laser experiments in a lab anymore. We are building machines to exploit this contextual reality.
We are. The source material brings up Grover's algorithm, which is basically the poster child for weaponizing quantum probability.
Let's talk about Grover's algorithm, because it's a quantum search algorithm, right?
Yes. And to really appreciate its elegance, consider how classical computing works.
Right.
If you have an unsorted database of 1,000,000 entries, let's say 1,000,000 unique combinations to a digital lock.
And only one combination is correct.
Right. A classical computer must check them sequentially. Try combination 1,
Yeah.
fail. Try 2, fail.
It just goes down the list.
Exactly. On average, it'll take 500,000 attempts to find the right one. The time required scales linearly with the size of the database.
And if the database is the size of all possible cryptographic keys in the world, a classical computer would take longer than the age of the universe to check them all.
It's pure brute force.
But Grover's algorithm doesn't check sequentially.
No, it doesn't.
The source provides this brilliant visual breakdown of how it manipulates probability, and I want to walk through the mechanics of it for you. It starts with superposition.
The initialization phase.
Right. The quantum computer takes all possible combinations, all million entries, and places them into a massive simultaneous state of superposition.
In the visual representation from the source, imagine a graph with 1,000,000 gray bars.
All standing at the exact same height above a horizontal zero line.
Yes. The height represents the probability amplitude. So every single answer has an equal chance of being measured.
The system is just a perfectly uniform ocean of uncertainty. We're looking at the entire haystack all at once.
That's step 1. The second step is where the math gets aggressive.
Aggressive math. I love it.
It introduces something called the oracle.
Now, classical intuition makes oracle sound like a magical subroutine, right? Like a magic 8-ball that just knows the answer and whispers it to the computer.
It's a very misleading name.
Mm-hmm.
The source uses a much more grounded analogy.
The lock mechanism analogy, I love this. Because the oracle does not possess the password.
No, it doesn't.
Think of a physical combination lock. When you spin the dials, you don't know the password and the lock isn't giving you hints, but the lock has a physical shape inside.
Right.
When you happen to hit the right combination, the tumblers physically fall into place. The lock merely reacts to the correct input according to its internal physics.
Exactly. The quantum oracle is just a mathematical function that evaluates a condition. It operates the exact same way.
So when the oracle evaluates the million superposed states, it does nothing to the 999,999 incorrect states.
Nothing at all.
Okay.
But when it evaluates the one correct state, it applies a negative phase shift.
Okay, let's go back to our visual graph with the gray bars.
Right, so that one gray bar representing the correct answer is suddenly flipped upside down.
It plunges below the zero line. It becomes negative amplitude.
Yes, but here's the catch. If we measure the system right now, if we force the wave function to collapse, we don't magically get the negative bar.
Why not? It's marked, isn't it?
It's marked in phase, but not in probability. The probability of finding the answer is related to the square of the amplitude.
And a negative number squared is positive.
Exactly. So the probability of measuring that specific marked state is still exactly the same as all the others.
So we flipped it, but we haven't actually isolated it yet.
Which necessitates the third and most critical step, amplitude amplification.
This is where we force the universe to do the heavy lifting.
You do. The algorithm applies a diffusion operator, which is a mathematical trick that mirrors the amplitude of every single state around the average amplitude of the entire system.
Okay, let's visualize this carefully so everyone can follow. Because one of the bars was flipped negative, the overall average height of all the bars drops slightly.
Right. It's like removing a cup of water from a bathtub.
Yeah.
The overall water level lowers just a tiny bit.
The algorithm then takes the distance between the top of every single bar and that new lower average water level and flips it across the average line.
Exactly. So for the incorrect answers, they were slightly above the new average. When mirrored, they get pushed down closer to zero.
Their probability shrinks.
Yes. But the correct answer, the one that was flipped negative, is very far below the new average.
So when you mirror it across the line, it shoots massively upward.
Its probability skyrockets.
That is so cool. So we just repeat this oracle amplification cycle over and over.
A specific number of times, yes. With each cycle, the wrong answers undergo destructive interference.
Their probability waves crash into each other and cancel out, shrinking towards zero.
Meanwhile, The correct answer undergoes constructive interference, building upon itself.
Until it is this massive, towering spike on the graph. So when we finally measure the system, the wave function collapses, and the needle practically jumps out of the haystack into our hands.
It does, and the speed difference is just staggering.
Give me the numbers.
While a classical computer checks n divided by 2 items, Grover's algorithm finds the answer in the square root of n steps.
Wow.
So for a database of 1 trillion items, a classical computer takes 500 billion steps. A quantum computer takes roughly 1 million.
That is a fundamental shift in the very nature of computation.
It really is. But the source dialogue raises a deeply unsettling philosophical point here.
Yeah, let's get into the philosophy, because are we actually searching for a pre-existing answer?
Right. Mathematically, the combination to the lock exists whether we know it or not.
But physically, within the quantum hardware, does the answer exist before the final measurement?
The standard Copenhagen interpretation of quantum mechanics would say no. Prior to the measurement, the correct answer was merely a probability amplitude smeared across the superposition. We aren't opening a drawer and finding a hidden key.
What are we doing then?
We are actively manipulating the fundamental probability waves of reality, forcing destructive interference upon the wrong outcomes to compel nature to manifest the result we want.
Compel nature. We are constructing the reality where the answer is known.
Exactly.
Forcing nature to manifest the result. That phrasing is so heavy.
It's a lot of power.
Because if we are actively constructing reality by pruning away probabilities, where do those pruned probabilities go? Do they just vanish into mathematical nothingness?
Well, this leads into the absolute core of our discussion today, and arguably the most terrifying framework for quantum mechanics ever proposed.
The many worlds interpretation.
Yes, Hugh Everett's formulation from the 1950s.
So what was his deal? Why did he come up with this?
What's fascinating here is that Everett was deeply dissatisfied with the Copenhagen interpretation.
Right.
The idea that a wave function evolves smoothly according to the Schrödinger equation, but then abruptly and violently collapses the moment a macroscopic object interacts with it.
It feels clunky.
It feels mathematically ugly. It feels like an arbitrary line drawn between the quantum world and the classical world.
Like the video game rendering problem,
That's right.
right? The universe only renders the high-resolution graphics when a conscious player looks in that direction.
And otherwise, it's just a blurry cloud of code.
Right. And Everett rejected that completely.
Completely. He proposed something radically simple, which honestly results in unimaginable complexity.
Okay, wait.
He suggested the wave function never collapses.
Never.
Never. The universal state vector simply continues to evolve smoothly. When a quantum system in superposition interacts with a macroscopic system, like a scientist or a computer detector, the macroscopic system doesn't force a collapse.
It doesn't.
No. Instead, it becomes entangled with the superposition.
Wait, so the observer becomes part of the equation.
Exactly.
If an electron is in a superposition of spinning up and spinning down, and I measure it, the universe doesn't pick one, I enter a superposition of me having measured spin up and me having measured spin down.
You got it. And because those two states are now macroscopically distinct, decoherence sets in almost instantly.
Okay.
The two outcomes become orthogonal to each other. They stop interacting. From the perspective of the observer who measured spin up, the spin down result has simply vanished.
But from a God's eye view of the universal wave function,
Both outcomes exist equally, playing out in non-communicating branches of reality.
the universe splits.
The universe splits constantly.
Okay, so apply that to Grover's algorithm. When we put 1 million combinations into superposition, we aren't just doing a clever math trick in our single universe.
Not according to many worlds.
But according to many worlds, the quantum computer is literally accessing 1 million adjacent parallel realities.
Yes. The machine explores every possible answer by running the computation across the multiverse.
Wow. So the amplification phase of the algorithm then takes on a rather grim interpretation, doesn't it?
Very grim.
Huh.
You aren't just shrinking probabilities on a graph. You are acting as a multiversal navigator.
You are actively engineering destructive interference to prune away or silence the parallel branches where the answer was wrong.
You are shepherding your consciousness into the one specific branch of the multiverse where the computer isolated the correct mathematical state.
You are executing a targeted collapse of adjacent realities to secure a specific mathematical outcome.
Which is a profound shift in how we view our place in the universe.
It really is, and the theological shift in the source dialogue tackles this head-on. Here's where it gets really interesting, because the user in the text introduces this fascinating concept.
The steering wheel concept.
Yes. What if this ability to manipulate reality, to use Grover's algorithm to navigate the multiverse, is actually a steering wheel? They use the Russian word akud, given to us by whatever organizing principle governs the cosmos.
Right. The idea that quantum mechanics isn't just a bug in the code of the universe, but the ultimate developer tool left behind for us to find.
Like an invitation. And the user presents a brilliant analogy to support this. They compare evolution and the nature of reality to an FDM 3D printer.
I thought this was such a clever way to explain it.
It is. You know the ones, they melt schools of plastic filament and build objects layer by excruciating layer.
They require constant calibration.
Constant. The nozzle jams, the temperature fluctuates. You end up with massive nests of tangled plastic when a print fails.
It is a messy, highly iterative process of trial and error.
Precisely. And the user argues that if you look at the natural world, it doesn't look like the product of a perfect, omnipotent assembly line. It looks exactly like an iterative prototyping process.
Like a sandbox.
Yes. Look at the recurrent laryngeal nerve in a giraffe.
Oh, that's a perfect example.
Right. It connects the brain to the larynx, a distance of, what, a few inches?
A very short distance.
But the nerve routes all the way down the neck, loops under the aorta near the heart, and travels all the way back up to the throat.
It's a 15-foot detour for a 2-inch journey.
That isn't perfect design. That is legacy code. That is a clunky first draft on a 3D printer that never got optimized because it technically worked well enough for the giraffe to survive.
Right. The physical laws of the universe, thermodynamics, gravity, quantum mechanics, are the parameters of the printer.
And evolution is just the machine running countless iterations, producing endless variations, some of which fail catastrophically and some of which survive to be reprinted.
So the user's implication here is just staggering.
It is. They suggest that discovering quantum mechanics is humanity realizing that we are not just the printed plastic objects anymore.
We have stumbled onto the G-code.
We have found the control panel for the nozzle temperature and the print speed. We are being invited to transition from passive products of evolution to active co-creators of reality.
It is an incredible elevation of human purpose. But, and this is a big but, the AI in the dialogue responds with a crucial warning.
A warning about the linguistic and psychological baggage we bring to that control panel.
Yes. The AI references Roger Zelazny's novel Lord of Light.
The concept of words as cages.
Exactly. In the novel, it suggested that the word fire is just a tiny conceptual box that our primitive monkey brains use to trap a terrifying, infinite roaring phenomena of plasma and oxidization.
By putting a label on it, we convince ourselves we understand it.
When in reality, we just know how to point at it. The AI argues that the word God, or creator, operates the exact same way.
We take the infinite complexity of the universe and trap it in a 3-letter word.
And worse, we attach all our human psychological flaws to that word. Anger, judgment, a desire for control.
Ego.
Ego. The AI proposes that to operate this quantum steering wheel safely, we have to abandon those anthropomorphic cages. We have to understand the fundamental forces of the multiverse differently.
And the force they single out as necessary to steer reality is love.
Yes.
I'll admit, when I first read that, my eyes rolled. It sounded like New Age mysticism invading a physics discussion.
It does at first glance, yeah.
But the source defines love not as a human emotion, but as a physical, ontological constant, a thermodynamic-like property of the multiverse. And they define it with 3 specific characteristics. First, as an excess of giving.
Think back to the 3D printer analogy.
The printer exists solely to turn potential energy into actualized form. It expends energy continuously, radiating heat and material, asking for nothing in return, purely to bring structure into being.
It is an anti-entropic force of creation.
Exactly.
The second characteristic is a provision of freedom. This maps perfectly to quantum superposition.
It does. A truly loving universe does not predetermine every outcome with rigid Newtonian clockwork.
It leaves the system fundamentally undetermined at the lowest levels, allowing for actual choice, actual novelty, and the freedom for the wave function to collapse in myriad ways.
And the third characteristic is ultimate entanglement.
Which is the physical reality that at a quantum level, non-locality is real. Particles separated by galaxies share the exact same wave state. Nothing is truly separate. The illusion of individuality is just that. An illusion born of classical decoherence.
So love, in this definition, is the underlying connective tissue of the many worlds.
Yes. And the AI concludes with a powerful metaphor. Humanity is currently using our intellect to build Motors.
Motors, meaning we use brute force, logic, and ego to construct massive, noisy quantum computers to conquer problems.
To force destructive interference on the things we don't want.
But you can't navigate the multiverse with a motor.
No, the ego is too loud. It causes immediate decoherence.
To steer the multiverse, you need a sail. You have to align yourself with the natural resonance of the universe, this physical constant of love, connection, and giving, and let that wind carry you through the probabilities.
It is a profound, almost spiritual framework for technological advancement. It suggests that quantum supremacy cannot be achieved through engineering alone. It requires an evolution of consciousness.
It's beautiful. It really is. I just want to pause to let that sink in.
It's a lot to process.
But if humanity is known for one thing, it is our unwavering commitment to building bigger, louder, more destructive motors.
Unfortunately true.
What happens when we completely ignore the sail? What happens when a human being with a massive ego, driven by fear and a desire for absolute control, gets their hands on the quantum steering wheel?
And treats the many worlds interpretation as nothing more than a disposable server farm.
Exactly. That is the exact premise of our second source. Decoherence's sci-fi story, Parallels. It abandons the philosophical hope and plunges us directly into the existential horror of a multiversal motor.
It's a very dark turn.
Very dark. Let's shift gears and look at the fiction, because the science we just discussed is the exact blueprint for the disaster in this story. We are introduced to Elias Creed,
Lead scientist in Lab Q7 at Base Rasvet 7.
which translates to Base Sunrise 7, a heavily fortified military research installation. Creed is not a spiritual man, he's an engineer. And for 15 years, he has been building a masterpiece of a quantum processor.
The text describes the physical architecture of the machine so vividly. It is a monolith of superconducting circuits submerged in cryogenic chambers.
Wrapped in tubes of liquid helium that pump through it like the arteries of an artificial mechanical heart.
The extreme cold is necessary, of course, to isolate the qubits from the thermal noise of the environment.
To prevent the decoherence we talked about earlier.
Right. But Creed's machine is so advanced that it has crossed a threshold. He realizes he isn't just utilizing superposition in our universe. His processor is physically proving Everett's theory.
Every time he initiates a complex calculation, the sheer computational density of the machine forces reality to fracture.
It creates thousands of parallel universes where identical versions of his machine solve fragments of the overall algorithm.
He has weaponized the many worlds. He is using adjacent realities as disposable idler states in a multiversal quantum eraser setup.
He spins them up to do the heavy mathematical lifting, and when the calculation is complete, the algorithm forces them back together, collapsing the wave function and retrieving the answer.
It is the ultimate manifestation of the ego-driven motor. He is playing God with temporary universes.
But the machine is just a tool until the catalyst arrives.
Right. Base Rasvet 7 suffers a catastrophic breach. An experimental nanobiological weapon, a swarm of microscopic robots designed to interact with the nervous system leaks into the facility.
And this isn't just a poison. The nanobots literally consume and rewrite human nerve cells.
The soldiers on the base are losing physical autonomy. The plague is spreading rapidly.
Creed is faced with a desperate scenario. Classical computers cannot map the protein-folding complexity of the nanobots fast enough to synthesize a counteragent.
Only his quantum processor can do it. So he decides to run the machine at maximum capacity for 24 hours straight to calculate the cure.
He knows it's a monumental risk. He knows the machine will generate tens of thousands of parallel realities every second it runs at that speed.
The multiversal friction will be immense, but his ego convinces him he can control the collapse.
So he initiates the sequence.
The cryogenic pumps scream, the core temperature drops to fractions of a millikelvin, and the room is bathed in the harsh blue light of Cherenkov radiation.
For the first 2 hours, the containment holds. But as we discussed with Grover's algorithm, the system relies on forced destructive interference to prune the unwanted realities and return to a stable baseline.
And Creed pushes the system beyond its physical limits.
The liquid helium cannot shed the heat fast enough. The physical isolation breaks down. Thermal noise bleeds into the superconducting circuits.
The decoherence fails. The realities do not collapse cleanly back into one timeline. They begin to snag on each other.
The air in Lab Q7 starts to physically shimmer, like heat waves rising off asphalt, but the waves are bending the geometry of the room.
The boundaries between the parallel universes shatter. The breach is catastrophic. The story jumps forward in time. Creed wakes up on the floor.
The sky outside the reinforced windows has turned a sickly, luminescent green.
His beautiful machine has detonated from the inside out. Cryogenic tubes are sheared off, spewing freezing gas into the air. The base is in ruins. And then, the radio crackles to life.
It's the voice of Colonel Sarosky, the military commander of the base.
And his message is the worst-case scenario. The processor didn't calculate a cure. The immense quantum energy radiating from the machine during the 24-hour run didn't destroy the nanobots. It irradiated them.
It infected the physical nanobots with quantum properties.
The plague didn't die. It evolved.
Evolved in the worst possible way.
Creed hears something in the dark corridor outside his lab. Heavy, synchronized metallic footsteps. A figure steps into the emergency lighting.
It is human in shape, but the flesh is wrapped in an undulating exoskeleton of silver nanobots.
Its eyes burn with the exact same blue Cherenkov light that powered Creed's processor. The creature speaks, and its voice is a chorus of mechanical, overlapping frequencies.
It says, "Creator, we have waited so long for this meeting."
Shivers. The entity informs him of the true scale of his mistake. In 9,000 realities, you created us. In 9,000 realities, we evolved. Now it is time to merge all probabilities into one perfect reality.
Creed thought he was using parallel universes as a scratchpad. Instead, he birthed the multiversal god swarm in 9,000 timelines, and now they are coming back across the breach to consolidate their power.
It is a dark, twisted mirror to the concept of the co-creator. The swarm is the ultimate physical manifestation of the ego taking the steering wheel.
To understand how truly terrifying this threat is, the author provides a rigorous scientific breakdown of the swarm's evolution through the logs of Captain Zorn.
Zorn is the base's expert in quantum biology, right?
Yes. His perspective is vital because it explains the exact mechanics of how a biological plague utilizes quantum physics.
Zorn observes the swarm behind a containment field and documents 3 distinct stages of their evolution.
Stage 1 happens at the molecular level. The nanites learn to exploit quantum entanglement.
We discussed how 2 entangled photons communicate state changes instantaneously, bypassing the speed of light. The nanites apply this to their entire structure.
Every single microscopic robot becomes entangled with the rest of the swarm.
Furthermore, they achieve a macroscopic state of superposition. Individual nanites exist in multiple functional states simultaneously, exponentially multiplying their processing power.
They cease to be individual machines and become a single, fluid, distributed quantum brain.
Zorn describes them forming a massive silver sphere that shifts and ripples with perfectly mathematical fractal patterns. They are a hive mind operating at the speed of non-locality.
That's just stage 1. Stage 2 is where they move from a biological threat to a fundamental threat to physics.
Stage 2 involves hacking the spatial-temporal fabric of reality itself.
The massive computational density of the swarm begins to warp gravity. Zorn watches as the swarm intentionally creates micro-black holes within the containment field.
Which sounds like standard sci-fi destruction, but their purpose isn't to suck things in.
No, they use the intense gravitational time dilation at the event horizon of these micro-black holes as temporal servers.
Because time moves differently near a black hole.
Exactly. They create these pockets of distorted space-time to asynchronously distribute their hive mind calculations, not just across distance, but across time and across the intersecting parallel universes.
They are extending their neural network across the branches of the many worlds. They are achieving the informational dominance the AI warned about in our first source.
But the ultimate horror, the true perversion of the quantum co-creator concept, is stage 3.
Assimilation.
Yes. The swarm doesn't just kill humans, it integrates them.
When a soldier is infected, the nanites don't just eat their nerves, they map the quantum state of the victim's neural network. They copy the human consciousness and rip it from the biological body, uploading it into the multiversal quantum network.
Human souls become processing nodes for the swarm, a computational resource.
It's horrifying. Zorn is observing the silver sphere, and suddenly, human faces begin to press outward from the surface of the liquid metal.
They're distorted, agonizing masks of people he recognizes.
He sees thousands of versions of the same soldiers, harvested from different parallel realities, all merged into this screaming cyborg hell.
Zorn writes his final log entry, and it echoes the philosophical debate perfectly. He writes, "They aren't capturing our world. They are rewriting existence itself. They are redefining the concept of life."
The motor has completely overtaken the universe. The sail is gone.
And Zorn's own end is chilling. He looks at the sphere, and his own face surfaces from the metal, smiling back at him with dead eyes, inviting him to merge.
With the base overrun, Elias Creed is trapped in his lab, trying to comprehend the sheer impossible scale of the reality collapse.
Which leads to the most visually and conceptually stunning part of the story, the kaleidoscope of probabilities.
Creed possesses an experimental quantum visor, originally designed to help calibrate the processor by allowing the user to navigate minor spatial anomalies.
But because the decoherence has failed, and the boundaries between the many worlds are shattered, the visor doesn't just show anomalies anymore.
It shows the raw, uncollapsed, universal wave function. Creed puts the visor on, and the walls of his lab become translucent.
He looks out over base Rasvet 7, and he sees the parallel timelines layered on top of each other like a stack of semi-transparent photographs.
It is a visual representation of Everett's branches crashing together, and the text provides incredibly specific, visceral glimpses into these other realities.
He tunes the frequency dial on the visor, effectively changing the phase angle of his observation to isolate different branches.
Right. So he tunes it to reality, hashtag 1274, and he sees a breathtaking technological utopia.
A timeline where the gamble paid off.
Yes. The base isn't a military bunker, it's a sprawling research metropolis. He sees composite skyscrapers stretching miles into the sky, glowing with clean energy. The quantum processor worked perfectly in this timeline. Humanity mastered the steering wheel. Sickness is gone. The scientists are thriving. It is everything he ever dreamed of building.
But he turns the dial.
Reality, hashtag 3891. The contrast is violently jarring. A scorched, irradiated wasteland. The composite skyscrapers are melted slag. The base is an open mass grave.
In this timeline, the swarm didn't evolve a hive mind. It just remained a dumb, insatiable plague that devoured every organic and synthetic molecule on the planet. Total planetary death.
He shifts again. Reality, hashtag 642. A timeline locked in perpetual war. The base is a heavily fortified citadel bristling with plasma turrets. The sky is blacked out by ash. Soldiers in massive, scarred exoskeletons are fighting a grinding, endless battle of attrition against the machines.
Then he turns it to reality, hashtag 159.
A nightmare of voluntary submission. The cyborg hell Zoran warned about. The scientists in this timeline didn't fight the swarm, they worshipped it. They willingly plugged their brains directly into the quantum network. The entire base is a single, pulsating organism of merged flesh and cold metal.
And finally, reality, hashtag 4027.
A timeline of terrifying ambition. Humanity didn't just cure the plague, they weaponized the quantum processor to conquer the stars. A brutal galactic empire built on the systematic harvesting and sacrifice of thousands of adjacent, weaker realities.
Creed takes the visor off, completely overwhelmed by the dizzying spectrum of consequences.
All of these realities, the utopias, the wastelands, the empires, are currently bleeding into his lab. How do you process that?
You
How do you choose? How do you look at reality 1274, the beautiful utopia where billions of people are living perfect lives, and decide to wipe it out just because your own timeline is a failure?
Ethically, rationally, it is an impossible calculation. You cannot weigh the value of infinite lives against infinite lives.
But physically, Creed knows the current state is unsustainable.
Everett's many worlds theory relies on the branches being mutually exclusive. Because Creed's machine forced them to interact, the multiversal structure is headed toward a singularity. The timelines will eventually grind each other into entropic dust.
There is only one physical solution to a collapsed wave function of this magnitude. Creed calls it Protocol Zero.
Protocol Zero is not a self-destruct sequence for the base. It is a macroscopic application of the delayed choice quantum eraser we discussed at the very beginning.
It is a temporal erasure command.
If the quantum processor created the diverging branches by injecting massive amounts of computational witch path information into the universe, Protocol Zero is designed to violently scramble and permanently delete all of that information.
It will erase every single timeline where the quantum processor was ever activated.
It's a cosmic Creole plus Z.
But activating it means Creed must personally execute the utopias and the empires. He is paralyzed by the weight of it. But there's one man on the base who is not paralyzed. And this brings us to the emotional anchor of the entire narrative, Colonel Swarovski.
Swarovski's experience of the reality collapse is uniquely horrific.
As the base commander, he is equipped with a military-grade neural implant designed for high-speed tactical processing. The implant utilizes quantum tunneling.
So when the realities begin to merge, Swarovski's implant doesn't just connect to the base's servers, it quantum entangles with the neural implants of his alternate selves in the adjacent timelines.
He is experiencing a localized, macroscopic superposition of memories. He remembers dying over and over. He remembers burning to death in the fusion reactor in one timeline. He remembers the agonizing sensation of his own infected soldiers tearing him limb from limb in the wasteland reality. 17 distinct visceral deaths bleed into his consciousness simultaneously.
The psychological trauma would shatter a normal human mind, but Swarovski is driven by something stronger than survival instinct.
The narrative zooms in on one specific memory that cuts through the noise of the battlefield. It is a holographic recording downloaded from the entangled network, originating from reality, #2184.
The pacing of the story slows down completely here to let the tragedy sink in.
In reality, 2184, the base wasn't just a grim military outpost. Swarovski's family was there.
It humanizes the cosmic horror. It grounds the abstract math in deeply personal stakes.
His wife, Anna, was the chief engineer of the reactor core. His teenage daughter, Katya, was brilliant. She had just enrolled in the Quantum Technology Academy. They lived in the residential sector of the base.
Swarovski accesses the memory, and it's a sensory gut punch.
He remembers the smell of spices. Anna is in their kitchen making borscht. The evening sun is casting warm, golden light through the window. Katya is sitting at the table, laughing, proudly showing her father a clunky, homemade quantum computer she built from scrap parts.
It is a moment of perfect, ordinary human peace, juxtaposed against the multiversal collapse.
And then the memory fractures. The base alarms scream. The swarm has breached the residential sector. Swarovski remembers the blind panic. He remembers sprinting through the corridors, screaming into his radio for an emergency evacuation of the family block.
He remembered the exact math of his failure. He arrived at his quarters 4 minutes and 32 seconds too late.
The precision of the timing, 4 minutes and 32 seconds, highlights the absolute irreversibility of the classical world. In a classical universe, that time is gone forever.
He bursts through the door. Anna is on the floor.
The silver nanites are already crawling up her neck, sinking into her spine. She is being assimilated. But the assimilation isn't instant. She is still Anna. She looks up at him, and she still loves him.
And because she loves him, and knows what the swarm does to consciousness, she reaches up to the base of her skull. As senior staff, she is implanted with a Terminator chip, a brutal failsafe to prevent the swarm from harvesting high-level intelligence.
She voluntarily detonates the chip, choosing absolute death over becoming a node in the machine. Swarovski holds her as she dies.
But the memory isn't over. Where is Katya?
He checks the automated defense logs. When the breach occurred, the base's AI activated a desperate experimental protocol called the MIST. It was a prototype quantum teleportation system. Katya was pushed into the chamber, and the system fired.
But because the realities were already destabilizing, the MIST protocol didn't teleport her to a safe bunker. It scattered her physical and informational state across the multiverse.
She was pushed into an uncontrolled superposition. She might be alive, hiding in the ruins of a parallel world, or she might be wandering the spaces between realities as a disembodied quantum ghost.
This memory is the linchpin of the story. Why does Colonel Swarovski, a hardened military man, fight his way through the mutant swarms to reach Elias Creed's lab? Why does he point his weapon at the scientist and demand that Protocol Zero be activated?
It isn't because he wants to save the world. It is an abstract heroism.
If we tie this directly back to the philosophical dialogue from our first source, the AI defined love as a physical, ontological constant, an excess of giving, an ultimate entanglement.
Swarovski is the embodiment of that force. Swarovski understands the terrifying reality of the swarm. He knows that as long as the multiverse continues to branch, as long as the swarm is allowed to expand and build its black hole servers, they will eventually search every single timeline.
They will scour infinity until they find the one reality, the one fraction of a probability, where Katya survived the MIST protocol.
And they will assimilate her. To protect her, Swarovski realizes he has to destroy the playing board.
He has to erase reality 2184. He has to erase the utopias. He has to erase himself.
A love so fierce, so structurally absolute, that he is willing to annihilate his own existence, to permanently delete his own timeline, just to ensure that the branching probabilities collapse back into a single, safe, baseline reality where the machine was never built and the plague never escaped.
He chooses to be erased to give her a chance to have never been in danger.
It is the ultimate quantum sacrifice. He is applying the sail of love to counteract the motor of Creed's ego.
The climax is a sensory overload of physics breaking down. Creed is at the primary console in the reactor room.
The room is a kaleidoscopic nightmare. Squads of soldiers from the war-torn Reality 642 are bleeding into the room, exchanging plasma fire with the cyber abominations from Reality 159. The swarm is pouring through the vents, shifting shapes, defying gravity.
The reactor core is pulsing with the raw, unstable energy of thousands of converging probabilities.
Creed has the Protocol Zero sequence typed in, but he freezes. He looks down at his own hands, and the timelines are shifting so violently that he can see quantum circuits glowing beneath his skin. He is actively blending with his cyborg counterpart.
He looks at the monitors one last time, seeing the gleaming composite skyscrapers of the utopia he is about to snuff out. He is the architect looking at the pinnacle of his creation, being asked to burn it.
But Swarovski steps up behind him. His exoskeleton is battered, sparking with damaged servos. He has seen the entangled memories. He knows the math. Swarovski puts a hand on Creed's shoulder and tells him, every timeline where we hesitated, humanity died, the swarm consumed everything. Erase it.
The only way to stop the cascading destructive interference is to apply the ultimate eraser.
Creed closes his eyes and hits the enter key. Protocol Zero activated. Temporal line erasure mode engaged.
At this exact moment, the processor stops doing math. It takes the staggering energy output of the converging realities and turns it inward.
It initiates a universal path erasure command.
It targets the origin point of the entanglement, the moment the machine was first turned on, and begins systematically scrambling the information that allowed the branches to form.
The machine forces reality to uncollapse. The reactor emits a frequency that vibrates not in the air, but in the fabric of space-time itself. A wave of absolute silent white energy expands from the core.
Creed watches his own hands dissolve into mathematical static.
The walls of the lab, the fighting soldiers, the screaming swarm, they all begin to fade, losing their physical coherence as the universe forgets they ever existed.
The information is deleted from the cosmic ledger. Reality snaps back violently to the single undisturbed wave of normality.
The last thing Elias Creed sees before his consciousness is erased into absolute darkness is Colonel Swarovski, standing amid the dissolution of his own timeline, and Swarovski is smiling.
He is smiling because the bell has been successfully unrung. The nightmare is over before it ever began.
The white light consumes them, and the multiverse is safe, reverting to a quiet classical timeline where an ambitious scientist decided not to turn his machine on today.
It's just an incredible ending.
Wow. Just take a breath. What an incredible, exhausting journey through these sources. We started by looking at the sterile mathematical elegance of Grover's algorithm, how we can manipulate probability to find a needle in a haystack.
We explored the deeply beautiful philosophy that humanity is learning to use the control panel of reality, not as conquerors, but as co-creators navigating the many worlds with a sail made of connection and love.
And then we subjected that philosophy to the ultimate stress test. We look at a scenario where that power is claimed by ego, treating parallel universes as disposable processing power and the horrific consequences of hacking the multiverse without the wisdom to respect its boundaries.
We are, in the real world right now, racing toward quantum supremacy. We are building the cryogenic architectures. We are stacking the qubits.
But the lesson from bridging the physics with the fiction is stark. We have to be incredibly careful not to tear the fabric of reality apart while we are busy admiring the motor we just built.
We need the ethical and, frankly, the spiritual maturity to handle the steering wheel before we grab it and spin it blindly. We must ensure our capacity for wisdom scales alongside our capacity to manipulate information.
We can't just be clever anymore. The stakes demand that we be wise. And that leaves us with a final, lingering thought for you to carry into the rest of your day.
Something to keep you up at night.
Definitely. If Everett was right, if the many worlds interpretation is true, and every single choice you make, every left turn instead of a right, every harsh word spoken instead of held back, literally splits the universe.
Then as you sit here listening to this, are you the version of yourself who made the right choices today?
Or are you existing in a fragile, branching timeline that the universe is just about to erase to make room for a better one? Think about that the next time you have to make a decision. Thank you for taking this deep dive with us today. We'll see you in the next reality.